Hello, folks, and welcome again to another episode of the Health, Happiness, and Performance Show. I'm Dave Mayo from hackyourgut.com, and today we're going to talk about why I use a Fitbit Charge 4HR to help optimize my lifestyle. I specifically choose the Fitbit Charge 4HR, but there are a lot of wearables that you can choose. But there's a reason I use the Fitbit devices, and I'm going to talk about that today. And then there's going to be a second part to this where I'm going to show you exactly how I've used that data to make better lifestyle choices and to kind of use the information I get from the Fitbit Charge to determine whether or not some sort of approach that I use is beneficial or it's just something that's a waste of time that I can get rid of. But before we do that, I want to kind of elaborate on some of the stuff we discussed in the last video. The last show episode was about circadian rhythms and kind of this pattern where we have these circadian rhythms within our body that are generated by having habit. Habit in when we eat, habit when we are physically active, habit when we go to bed, habit when we're exposed to stress, habit when we're being socially active and things of that nature. But I just want to reiterate something I talked about in that. So we have these circadian rhythms, which are kind of, think of them as I mentioned in the video, kind of things that just happen regularly over a 24-hour period, and we're generating these circadian rhythms in order to kind of create anticipatory responses to things. So, for example, when we eat at the same time every day, we get anticipatory responses in insulin, in the hormone ghrelin, in the hormone cortisol, that these just kind of superimpose themselves on our day-to-day profiles of each of those hormones, and we get these anticipatory responses that help ready our body for feeding or exercise or the other things that I've mentioned. So we get these circadian rhythms that respond to our habits, but we have to be careful here, because a lot of people think that they're going to be a kind of a passive observer with these circadian rhythms thing. In other words, as I mentioned in the video, you're not just going to sit in front of a sad lamp in the morning, wear blue blockers at night, and do time-restricted eating and build any sort of robust circadian rhythm. These circadian rhythms that we're generating kind of drive behavioral rhythms, and these behavioral rhythms feed back on the circadian rhythm. So what we end up getting is a biological rhythm, which is effectively kind of the behavioral rhythm superimposed over the circadian rhythm. And this is kind of how we really generate these robust biological rhythms of things like cortisol and insulin and ghrelin, which is a motivational appetite hormone, which will cause us to seek out food at the same times of the day. But in order to get these anticipatory responses, you need to have habit, you need to have patterns that you stick to. If you just have chaos going on throughout your day, which is what most people do, you're not going to get these anticipatory responses. In other words, switching your meal patterns, like moving lunch or skipping lunch, or breakfast or what have you. There may be some minor benefit for weight loss, but it's not really good for your circadian rhythms. It could potentially disrupt your digestion, and it's definitely not good for the microbiome. The microbiome wants habitual patterns just as much as we do. That helps optimize it to our physiology. But if you're changing everything every single day, it's not going to work out great for you. So the take-home message is you can't be a passive observer for circadian rhythms. You absolutely have to be an active participant. And the first thing you should ask is, what can I do to build a stronger circadian rhythm? Not what can I take? Unless you have all of your habitual patterns down pat, there's really no point in you wasting your time with any sort of supplement to boost circadian rhythms. There are potential ones in the pipeline, such as Nobiledin, which is in citrus fruit. Actually, there's a couple of chemicals or nutrients in citrus fruits that can actually potentially help build your circadian rhythm. But we're dealing with mouse studies, so we're quite a bit away. This is still kind of preclinical data. So essentially, the take home you should get from the circadian rhythm video before is random is bad, one size fits all or cookie cutter is bad. You have to individualize it to you, and you have to build these habits that you repeat day in and day out if your goal is to optimize your circadian rhythms, which is a wonderful segue into why I use the Fitbit Charge 4HR for optimizing my lifestyle and even in some respects motivating myself to be more physically active. That's the great thing about most of these wearable devices. They give you feedback, and they can give you motivation. For example, I have my goal set to 10,000 steps a day, even though I average about 14,000. That being said, there are days where I just don't get my step total. I don't really stress about it, but I'm currently on a 118-day streak with my 10,000 steps a day, and once I got to 100, I'm like, let's see how far I can get this going. So there is a motivational factor. Now, it's important to point out that some people just don't do well with more data. It makes them more anxious and stresses them out. Those people, this may not be for you. However, I've, for the most part, seen both myself and clients that people do well with this information, and there's no cheating it. You can't say, yes, I was physically active yesterday, and then but you weren't. The Fitbit chart is going to tell you. It's sort of I like it because it's a set it and forget it. If you want to get an idea of how good your habits are, one of the things I have people do when they get a Fitbit is to just wear it and don't change a thing. And you get a pretty good idea of how good or bad your lifestyle is just by kind of plopping it on your wrist and giving it a go. So what am I trying to get out of the Fitbit? And basically all of the devices now have the same data. They all kind of do heart rate. So we're specifically talking about the Insight, Inspire, the Alta, and the Charge and above. I think there might be a kids model that does not give you information, but I like the Charge 4 because it does do a little more data than the lower end models, and it's $120. I mean, it's so cheap for the information you get, which we'll discuss in a moment here. What am I personally looking at on the day-to-day or the week-to-week with my Fitbit in terms of data? I do look at steps, active minutes, which is essentially a correlate of moderate to vigorous physical activity. My sleep. Now, it's important to point out that these devices, specifically the Fitbit devices, but all of the wearables that are only using heart rate are not good at certain measures of sleep. The Fitbit has gone through validation studies. I believe the Oura Ring has gone through validation studies as well. And generally speaking, the best information you're going to get from these devices is total sleep time, your sleep latency, which is the time it takes you to fall asleep, as well as kind of when you toss and turn in the middle of the night, your REM sleep. And one of the interesting things that they're all doing now, but Oura Ring started doing, and now Fitbit's kind of jumped in, is the score. Important to point out, while that other stuff does have some validation information, the score is a proprietary formula for each individual tracker. And as far as I know, none of them have been matched up to other forms of sleep data to determine, hey, is this a really good measure of how good I'm sleeping? So it's a fun little metric, but it's not validated for anything. So best to kind of stick to the total sleep time, sleep latency, total REM sleep, and that type of thing. They also measure heart rate. I do pay attention to the heart rate, specifically with the Fitbit Charge. They give you your resting heart rate throughout the day, which is effectively your average heart rate when you're sitting for 5 or more minutes. They also crank out a readiness score, which is sort of like a kind of a stress management tool. I do like that information, but again, that's not really validated for anything. So there's only so much you can do with that. The sleep score and the readiness score are just things to sort of follow. If you do find that the Fitbit is, accurately giving you sleep scores and readiness scores, then maybe it is valid for you, and you can use that to dictate training load, or to determine if maybe as your readiness scores are dropping because of your sleep, maybe it's time to just kind of take a load off or what have you. But as I mentioned, those have not been validated for anything, so it's really difficult to say for sure that they're telling you something that is 100% worthwhile. Although I will say one of the more interesting things I've found with the Fitbit is that my sleep score has gotten much better. And based off of some literature I've read from them, they do tend to focus on the things that it measures accurately, but your sleep staging does matter as well. And we're going to kind of talk about that. There are some studies looking at how good the Fitbit is, as well as an interesting dude on YouTube named The Quantified Scientist that it's really great. He takes each of these wearables and then he'll compare them to polysomnography, which is the gold standard. You're getting brain waves to measure which stages of sleep you're going into. He has a great YouTube channel where he compares these things, which is really cool to look at, but obviously it's not the same as a randomized clinical trial. It's like a guy playing around with things, but it is very interesting information. Just to tell you right now, in terms of sleep, as far as I can tell, nothing is beating the Fitbit at all when he's measuring them and comparing them to the polysomnography, which breaks up your sleep stages between REM, deep, light, and awake. So one thing I should also mention about the Fitbit that I do use in terms of their data is their premium membership, which is around $80 or $90 a month, allows you to download your raw data, which I have done for sleep and physical activity. It's pretty interesting stuff. You got to stick to the things that it measures well and in a valid manner. So you're talking about total sleep time, sleep latency, sleep efficiency, which is total sleep time, total sleep latency minus total sleep time over total sleep time. That's a pretty accurate measure. If I remember correctly, they don't give you that. You actually have to plug that into the spreadsheet and calculate it. But it's based off of the good, valid raw data. So the premium, in my opinion, that's effectively the only reason I use it. Most of the other features that it measures in terms of breaking down your sleep and some aspects of stress management are free regardless of if you pay for the premium or not. So going on to the validation studies, I mentioned the things that the Fitbit sleep data is valid for. There have been a few validation studies looking at that. As I mentioned, it compares very well to actigraphy or the ActiWatch, which is kind of how we measure circadian rhythms and sleep. But again, those very rudimentary, sleep, total sleep time and sleep latency, not necessarily sleep staging. But the people at Fitbit have done a validation study comparing the Fitbit with polysomnography in terms of sleep staging. How good is the Fitbit in comparison to polysomnography, which is the gold standard? And ultimately, it's about a 70% similarity, which, let's face it, if you have a surgeon working on you, you don't want the guy that got a C-. But if you're comparing a $120 watch to, a device that's worth thousands and thousands of dollars, that's actually pretty good. So I do have a lot of confidence that it's going to get better. And so, I've been an early adopter of Fitbit even before they were doing anything like this. My first Fitbit was in 2012, and it was essentially a pedometer that also gave you active minutes. It was a clip-on dealio. So it's getting much better. I do suspect it's going to get even better. And for me, it's important to consistently measure data and, kind of stick to the same thing. So as far as I can tell, the forecast for Fitbit is better than any of the other devices. 70% is pretty good. No other device has gone through this, but if you follow the quantified scientist on YouTube, all of the other wearables, that's including Whoop, something called Me, Oura Ring, they kind of pale in comparison to the Fitbit in terms of matching up sleep staging to the polysomnography. So kind of as the take home, the Fitbit data is very useful, provided you're using the data properly and you can manage expectations. You can't be somebody that's going to get super anxious. If that's kind of your mindset on things, it might not be for you. You definitely shouldn't make yourself anxious about how bad your sleep is. Chances are, if you're going the step to do this, your sleep isn't that great, or you suspect it's not great. But some people, when given bad data, are not necessarily inclined to make positive steps to improve it. It might be something that makes them feel worse. It could make them feel more anxious, and the worst thing you can do for your sleep is make yourself more anxious about your sleep. For me personally, and for most of the people I've worked with, there are general trends where you can see how the Fitbit data does help. It really helps set your sleep and wake schedule. Sleep latency is something I look for. If you have long sleep latency, maybe you got to shift your bedtime a little later. So it really does help to kind of tweak that. For most people, it's easier to set their bedtime first around that sleep latency deal. Once you find where you fall asleep, more immediately, then you can kind of tweak how long you're in bed based off of your sleep data. It's helped me and my clients fine-tune their meal timing in terms of shifting their meals early or late, depending on their goals. finding a daily activity target. I can tell you I shoot for 60 or more moderate to vigorous physical activity minutes per day, so that's about 420 per week. So, and just kind of following how much physical activity I'm getting and comparing that to how well my sleep is going and my stress management does kind of help you kind of dial yourself in terms of the amount of physical activity that's right for you, as well as the timing of exercise. For the most part, early birds do better with earlier exercise. Night owls, they have a little more leeway. If you're trying to be an early bird, early is better. But if you're somebody who is either going to get physical activity at a specific time or not get it at all, you should get it at that specific time, and just understand that you might be disrupting your sleep or causing yourself to wake up earlier. Sleep hygiene as well. Sleep hygiene, there's kind of a core set of principles that work with sleep hygiene, including setting and maintaining a constant sleep and wake time, things of that nature. As well as there are some other things such as, getting your daily routine down to where you're not running around right before bed, getting your clothes, brushing your teeth and doing things like that. But there are also some tools such as when you should be blocking blue light with blue blockers, supplements that you could take such as chamomile tea or lavender to help you fall asleep. And you can kind of fine tune those things as well. Stress management and just paying attention to it's interesting when you follow stress management, they do have heart rate variability. And your heart rate, you'll kind of see things start to change first, but it's really interesting in that stress management score does seem to predict, at least for me, when I'm kind of pushing it a little too hard. But yeah, there's just so much stuff you can get from data from the Fitbit, and you can put in your nutrition and all that stuff. I don't recommend it. I don't do it. I approach nutrition differently, which we'll cover in another show. But just for today, there's just so much information that you can get with your Fitbit. The way that they display the information and collate it for you is much better than especially the iWatch and the Health app on the iPhone. So yeah, I'm just big on the Fitbit Charge 4 HR. In my opinion, the data is better, particularly with sleep. To make this $120 purchase a much better purchase than a $400 or $500 Oura Ring, which granted it might have some other bonuses, but to me sleep is key. I should note that there's also an app on the iPhone that's available. I'm mentioning this, it does not work well with the Fitbit. It doesn't even upload my Fitbit data at this point, but it will work with if you have an iWatch and you're using a health app on iPhone. It is called Social Rhythms. I suspect it will get better. They just put forth a study using the app, so I think as more people use that, and we kind of do the citizen data accumulation, that the app will get better. So that's it for today. Next episode, we're going to talk about specific things, specific steps, and specific things that I have tested using the Fitbit that are now part of my everyday routine. And coming soon, we're going to discuss my precision health report, which was very good. Very excited by the information I got. There's some information I took from it that is causing me to take other steps. For the most part, it verified that I'm pretty good at what I'm doing based off my genetic susceptibility to both type 2 diabetes and heart disease. So it'll be interesting. I'll discuss that with you guys. I'll discuss why I think certain aspects of my findings were found and things of that nature. But until then, thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope you guys have a nice week.